Welcome to this lecture on descriptive academic writing. And I want to share with you one very interesting impression, that you can never know the power of the absence. It is only when you experience something that you understand the power of not having it. And this is what we are going to witness with descriptive academic writing. Its significance cannot be evaluated appropriately until we have gone through this lecture. And as it is clearly put here by Chandler Gilbert Community College, who puts it here very clearly that writing that lacks description is in danger of being vague or overly general. And this is what you are going to experience after going through this lecture, that the power of description in academic writing cannot be underrated, even though it has been largely ignored by most academicians, by most students when you read their essays. So let's go through this together and see how best we can benefit from descriptive writing and by incorporating it in our academic essays. Let's look at, let's just mention the genres of writing. You're well aware that there are 4 genres of writing. Sometimes people split argument and persuasion as independent genres, but in most cases people view the two as one. But there is a thin dichotomy, there's a dichotomous distinction between the two. But we have expository, we have argument stroke persuasion, we have description, which we are going to go through today, and then we have the narrative. I believe that you have been taken through most of this. Now, the essence of taking you through all the genres of writing in this particular course unit is to guide you, to show you the importance of having all of them in our writing, in incorporating or integrating all the 4 or the 5 techniques in our essays so that we can be able to produce the best quality essays. Otherwise, as we shall go along, we shall find out that it is difficult, if not unsuccessful, to only commit yourself and rely on only one technique in order to produce an essay. They always say that every problem that we face, there's no single approach to solving it. You need multiple combinations in order to solve a problem. When you're given a task, whether it is assignment, it is coursework, it is an examination, it is a task. It is based on a certain problem that whoever has set that question or questions is asking you to solve. So when you're going to solve the problem, you cannot solve it singly. You cannot solve it using a single approach. And that is usually one of the common human error that we make. Whenever we are faced with a problem, we just want to look at one approach and we think we can be able to solve it. Yes, you may solve it, but how successfully, how effectively can you be able to solve a problem using a single approach? So this is the purpose of taking you through the 4 genres of writing so that you can be able to integrate them 2, 3, or 4 in your essay. And I usually encourage the students that it is vital that you incorporate all the 4 genres in your essay. You may find that in one paragraph you are using possibly 2 or even 3, but 2 would be sufficient to explain, to discuss an argument, to discuss a point. But if you're going to use only one genre in the entire essay, then there is going to be a problem with your essay. As we have seen right from the quotation from at the beginning of this lecture, that it will be risky to do without description in your academic writing. Let's look at the description writing. Let us just try to give an overview of what description writing is. But I want particularly to share with you my disappointment in most academic documents where description writing has largely been ignored. And either because of the biases, or because of ignorance, or because of negligence, you find that people usually believe that description is entirely a genre for storytelling, and therefore it has been eliminated or largely ignored in academic writing. But again, I want to take you back to the quotation that we saw from Chandler Gilbert Community College, where the emphasis has been placed on the importance of description in academic writing, that without it there is largely a great mistake. There's a great mistake that you make if you do not integrate description in your writing. So here said that descriptive writing is often associated with storytelling, as I've already mentioned. And because of this, people have that kind of bias that no, I think it has no place here. In my academic paper, in my essay, my academic essay. So because of this, people tend to lean very heavily towards the rest of the rest of the genre, and particularly expository and persuasion or argument. But very little possibly you will find narrative has been incorporated. But again, I want to reiterate this, that there's no single genre that can be able to produce the best quality essay. And it is only unless you have integrated them, that is when you can see the beauty of your writing. It is the quality of the essay that is going to be appreciated by your readers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to ensure that you integrate all the 4 genres of writing in each essay that you're going to write. We are going to demonstrate some of them and see how certain paragraphs have been made very effective because of this integration. Now, in fiction writing, we have been told that when you are going to describe, you are going to appeal to your readers through the 5 senses. You'll allow your readers to hear, to see, to taste, to touch, so as to feel the texture, and also to smell. And we're going to see all this, how successful they can be in all writing. So if in fictional writing, when you're telling a story, you are encouraged to appeal to your readers through the 5 senses. This means also that it is equally important to appeal to your readers through the 5 senses when you are engaged in academic writing. You can see how unfortunate it would be to deny your readers opportunity to experience the quality of your writing, your arguments through the 5 senses. We cannot deny the power of the 5 senses in every walks of life. And that is why I want to emphasize here that make sure that you do make every effort to include description in your writing so that your reader can be able to experience your argument through multiple senses. Now let's look at some of the areas where descriptive writing can feature in academic writing. I have listed 6 of them here, but ladies and gentlemen, I would like to encourage you to refresh your mind to explore other areas where descriptive writing can be applied when we're engaged in academic writing. We have here the process. When you're going to describe a process, we're going to look at the types of processes that you can use when you're going to write an academic paper. You can also use description when you're going to recount personal experience. You may be well aware that you can use your personal experience as evidence in your essay. And if you are going to recount that personal experience, you can make the best use of description to enable you to capture that part of the experience and integrate it in your essay. You can also use description when you are going to present and interpret data. Of course, you know usually that when you're going to do any research, you collect data first. After the collection of the data, then now you need to present and interpret it for the reader. So when you are going to make the presentation and interpretation of the data, the best thing that you can do is to use description to enable you to present this information and then interpret it for the benefit of the reader, as we shall see in some with an illustration. Then you can also embed it, integrate it in your arguments, or when you're writing an argumentative essay, you can integrate description in it if the purpose is to persuade, to swing the mind of your reader. Then finally, you may need the technique of description when you are going to define a concept. Sometimes some questions, either in an assignment or an examination, or even when you're writing for a conference, you may be dealing with a concept, an idea. And if you're going to deal with a concept, there's no way you can write an essay on a concept without defining it. And we are going to explore this and also see. Unfortunately, many times you find most students or most writers, when they are dealing with concepts, they run to dictionaries and extract the definition from the dictionary. A definition that may not even be applicable in the context in which they are writing, but simply because either ignorance or inability to exploit their creativity, so that the writing sounds like parroted piece. So description can help you quite a lot when you're going to define a concept. Now let us begin by exploring each of the above areas where description can be used. We can exploit descriptive technique when we're writing our academic papers. One of the areas that we have pointed out is the process description analysis. Another process description analysis, there are 2 types. We have the directional and informational. Directional process analysis is the type of description that tells you how something is done step by step up to the end. So if you're writing, you're telling your reader how to perform a certain task, what steps to go through until the task is accomplished. So usually we find it common with, for instance, recipe, or how to possibly operate a machine. Usually where you read a manual and the manual takes you step by step until you complete. If you're installing something, it will guide you up to that end. Or sometimes, if for instance you're going to repair something, You can also be given an instruction on how to go about it. That is where we find directional process analysis description. Well, even when you are possibly guiding somebody, giving somebody direction to a place, you can tell the person, when you reach here, do this, do this. So it is a step-by-step description how to overcome or how to solve a problem. That is with the directional description analysis, so the process analysis. Then the second one, which is the informational process description analysis. This one here does not tell you how to accomplish it. It does not give you the step-by-step approach to solving a problem. It gives you an overview, a view. It is focused on the end result. It is focused on the conclusion rather than on the process. While directional process analysis is concerned with the actions, the informational process analysis is concerned with the information, with what exactly has been completed, but not how you have completed it. Now, because of this, because of the nature or the structure of these two types of process description analysis, we find that it is the second one, informational process description analysis, that are usually integrated in academic writing. I think largely because the first one is relatively informal, and we know that with informal writing, we rarely use that kind of tone and register in academic writing. The second one is more formal, and therefore it fits much more easily in academic writing than the former. And again, I think also because most of academic writing, we are concerned with the product rather than how to get there. Unless when you are dealing with interpretation of data, then you can begin to say the data was collected by this and this and this until we got there. But even in that context, you still find that a lot of details are left out. So as I said before, the first one, this directional process analysis, is concerned with the process, the steps, the how question. Whereas the informational process description is concerned with the completion of the task, that this is the product, I have finished it. I don't need to guide you through the steps how I got there. So it uses the skill of summary, which actually I believe you went through during your high school. So you summarize the information, you condense it, and in this way, it is going to help you to engage your reader by giving them an insight, something that they are to think about. You know, I always believe that any piece of writing that gives the reader everything is not quality at all, because it does not give room for the reader to exploit, to analyze, to interpret. You don't do all that in academic writing. So this is the beauty of the informational process description analysis. So as you engage yourself in writing, look at some of those points. My personal belief is that before you engage yourself in writing, after you have listed down the points that you want to use in your essay, assign each point a genre or a group of genres. Can say that this first point I'm going to use expository. In the second point, I'm going to use argument. In the third, I'm going to use narrative. In the fourth, I'm going to use descriptive. Or you can say in the first, I'm going to use argument stroke description. In the first one, I'm going to use, second one, I'm going to use expository stroke narrative, so that you can pair some of them and see how best you can bring out the argument The prime purpose of this integration, and why I'm emphasizing on the issue of integrating genres in each paragraph, is that, as I mentioned before, that there's no single problem that calls for a single approach to solving it. So you may find that something can be more successful if 2 or 3 things are brought together, so that each one will be lending a certain portion of its intelligence, its knowledge, its competence, its strength to the other one, so that the weaknesses of the other can be compensated by the strength of this other one, as we shall see with some of the examples. Now, let us look at the example of informational process description analysis. I didn't include example of directional because, as I mentioned before, that it is informational process description analysis that we largely find in academic writing. Directional is usually very limited, if at all is to be used. So let us acquaint ourselves with this by going through this example, this illustration. I would like us to go through it and let's see how this particular writer has employed informational process description analysis technique in this paragraph and what has made it very successful. To ensure students are able to focus on process versus computation, the teacher begins model drawing using concrete manipulatives such as unifix cubes and number chips to solve simple story problems. Students model problems by adding to or taking away from the group. Once students understand how to use the manipulatives, the teacher reinforces the concept of number bonds and the understanding that a whole is composed of parts. After that, students begin drawing discrete models where one square represents each object. Once students understand cardinality, they can move to the most complex form of model drawing. The continuous model, where the unit bar represents a group based on the number labeled on the bar. So if you look at this one here, we are being taught a process through which this teacher here can guide the students on how to solve a problem. We are not told how, for instance, in the first sentence, we are not told how the teacher is going to draw using concrete manipulative such as unifix cubes and number chips. We are only told this is a completion, this is the completion. It is condensed piece of information. The whole process is summarized and condensed in just a few words, just a single sentence. Then in the second one, we are told that the students model by adding, and then we are not told the steps that the students take in order to add or take away from the group. So this is what informational description process analysis does. So eliminate all the nitty-gritty, all the details that could possibly take a lot of time. Just imagine if all the processes were using directional process description. We would possibly need more than one paragraph, and possibly we shall spend more time taking in, and we are not going to be engaged at all when we are dealing with directional process analysis. It just simply gives you everything and you only perform it. But the beauty of this one here is that it engages you, it allows you to interpret, to analyze, to dissect the information so that you become an active participant in the whole process. Then let us look at another area where we can use description. That is when we are interpreting and presenting research findings. As we said before, that when you are going to write an academic work, in whatever way you must collect data, whether the data is going to be collected in the field, whether the data is going to be collected in the library by reading books, whether the data is going to be collected using questionnaire or interview or observations, whatever method that you're going to use in order to collect data, that data, once it is collected, you now need to sit down and present it to the reader. As you're making the presentation, you will also be interpreting it to benefit the reader. Now, most cases, when you have presented data and you are interpreting it, you are likely going to be called upon to use the description in order to interpret it, as we shall see in this example. And I believe that in many cases, any raw data, whether they are figures, whether they are in form of tables or in form of graphs, you are going to be required to use description to help you to interpret this for the benefit of the reader. So let us look at this illustration and see how the writer has used a description method or technique in order to present and interpret the data. A follow-up of the children who went through the early service of experimental programs has shown that changes in IQ and other indicators of cognitive functioning were not dramatic, but were encouraging. Figures 16 and 4 report data for the first two experimental groups and contrast them with a control group T4 located in a town 60 miles away. The top dotted line represents the theoretical growth in intelligence of the imaginary group of children whose IQ remains at 100 for 6 years. The lower dotted line represents the theoretical growth of children who begin with 89 IQ and remain at that level for 6 years. Now let us recast our mind again here and see how and where and possibly why description has been used here in handling data, in handling findings. Let's look at the first sentence. The first sentence, we don't see the description at all used in the sentence. A follow-up of the children who went through the early series of experimental programs has shown that changes in IQ and other indicators of cognitive functioning were not dramatic, but were encouraging. So this one simply is establishing. So I'm going to ask you what genre of writing has the writer used in this first sentence. As it presents, it actually looks like it is a thesis statement, but what technique has been used to introduce this paragraph. Then the second sentence, figure 16 and 4, reports data for the first two experimental groups and contrasts them with a control group T4 located in a town 60 miles away. So even when you look at this one here, the use of description possibly can be argued. Maybe that 60 miles away, but that is the only little bit of description that we find. Otherwise, the whole sentence also does not have any clear description, at least in the interpretation of the data. Then now, the real use of description now comes in these last two sentences. The top dotted line represents the theoretical growth in intelligence of the imaginary group of children whose IQ remains at 100 for 6 years. The top dotted line is where we find the description. And I believe if the graph was here, you're going to lift your face or direct your eyes in that direction to see the top and the lines are dotted. So that is where we have the description. Then in the last sentence we say the lower dotted line represents the theoretical growth of children. Again, the lower. If the graph was here, you're going to lower your face and direct your eyes in the place where these lines are. And as we said before, that description deals with appeal to our five senses, seeing. So in this way, you are helping the reader to see. You are showing rather than telling the reader. So when you're handling data, please make sure that you make the best use of description to interpret, to present and interpret, and especially in the interpretation of the data. Then we can also find description used when we are conveying background knowledge and understanding. You know, writing or anything in life requires creativity. And the way you handle the points is purely based on your creative approach. You can see how to manipulate these genres of writing in order to bring out the best of the argument, the best of the points in your essay. So we're seeing that sometimes you want to lay the foundation of the argument before you bring the argument itself. So if you are going to start by laying the foundation, laying the basis, preparing the reader for the argument, one technique that you can use is description. So again, let us look at this example that is drawn out of, extracted from an article titled Anger In, Anger Out. In this article, the writer explores situations where we keep anger in ourselves and how destructive it is, because we can end up doing self-infliction, causing self-infliction on ourselves when we retain anger. And then when it talks about anger out, the writer argues that if you release that anger, either on an object or on the environment, then it sets you free. It doesn't mean, therefore, that you need to go around inflicting pain or destroying things because you want to release your anger. But let's look at the illustration here specifically in the context of conveying background, preparing the reader for the argument that you are presenting in a paragraph. So experimenting with young monkeys, Dr. Harry Harlow observed that when they left their mother's side, they usually engage in various kinds of aggressive, hostile behavior with other monkeys, including teasing and fighting. He observed that the monkeys were running around in a very exciting way. But if a monkey of this age was isolated from its peer group, it actually went into depressive withdrawal and began to tear at its own skin. This animal experiment demonstrates quite clearly that if the aggressive drive, of which I consider hostility to be a large part, does not come out, it goes inwards in a self-destructive way. Again, as we dealt with the other paragraphs, other illustrations, I want us again to go through this sentence by sentence, and then we see how the writer has established, prepared you, the reader, prepared me, the reader, for the argument in the paragraph. Look at the first few sentences. The writer has just laid the foundation using description. Now, even before we go into exploring this paragraph sentence by sentence, I would like to caution you, when you are going to incorporate description in your writing, avoid dramatic words, words that exaggerate an opinion, exaggerate an argument. So therefore, words of drama, words that describe actions that can be viewed, that can carry emotions, are usually eliminated when it comes to non-fiction writing. And we shall look at some of them briefly here. So saying that experimenting with monkeys, Dr. Harry Harlow observed that when they left their mother's side, the monkeys left their mother's side, they usually engage in various kinds of aggressive, hostile behavior with other monkeys. Probably you may not be able to see a description here very clearly. But when it says including teasing and fighting, still we don't see a very clear description here. But probably when you talk about aggressive, hostile behavior, you can begin to imagine what kind of behavior it is. You observe that the monkeys were running around in a very exciting way. This is where I find the description employed. But as I say, that the description that we employ in academic writing is different from the description that we find in fiction writing. Probably if this was a story that we are telling and a fictional writing that we're engaging in, then we would not use the word running very excitedly. Possibly we could have said that the monkeys leapt or dived or flew in a certain direction. But if we do that, then we shall be exaggerating and blowing facts out of proportion. Remember that many times when we are engaging description in academic writing or in all academic writing, we focus our attention on facts. What is factual? Anything that blows an idea beyond the reality, then that kind of writing, that kind of technique has no place in academic writing. So that is why in this particular case, our description is restricted to what is possible, what is true, what is realistic. Then in the next sentence, the writer says, but if a monkey at this age is isolated from the peer group, it actually went into depressive withdrawal and began to tear at its own skin. So tear at its own skin is also descriptive, because at least we can be able to visualize this. You can visualize these monkeys running in an exciting way. You can visualize the monkey tearing at its own skin. So this is where I find description has been used to prepare us. If a monkey is running and it is teasing and fighting one another, and then again it is tearing at its own skin, the writer is now preparing us for the argument. And what is this argument? The argument is in this last sentence. This animal experiment demonstrates quite clearly that if the aggressive drive of which I consider hostility to be a large part does not come out, it goes inwards in a self-destructive way. So in the last sentence, that is where we find the argument that this writer has been preparing us for. So you realize that the first couple of sentences in this paragraph, the writer uses description. And then the last sentence, the writer uses argument. So two genres have been incorporated, two genres of writing have been incorporated in this paragraph. And again, as we saw with the previous illustrations, a single use of genre in this paragraph wouldn't have been successful at all. So this is why we say that descriptive technique is very significant when we are going to get ourselves involved in academic writing. Then we say that you can also integrate it in an argument when you want to persuade. We have seen in the previous slide that you use description when you want to lay the foundation of an argument, so that you begin with it and then you end with the argument. But let us see in this particular case, we're saying that we are going to integrate description in an argument because we want to swing the mind of our readers, the mind of our listeners. Now, this is an illustration on abortion. Abortions that are performed much later in the pregnancy are not only terrible but also murder, which cannot be denied. This method of abortion, named prostaglandin, makes the contractions that a woman usually experiences at the end of pregnancy come sooner. The baby is usually stillborn, and the little body is then thrown into a bucket and left as medical rubbish, while the woman is wheeled off for the best medical attention. So just like we did with the previous slides, let's illustrations. Let us again go sentence by sentence and then see how the writer has presented this. Where is the argument and where is the persuasion? Where we find the description. Let's look at the opening sentence. Say, abortions which are performed much later in the pregnancy are not only terrible, but also murder which cannot be denied. So in this sentence, you don't see any description used here. It is the thesis statement for this particular paragraph. The writer is announcing and saying, this is what I think, this is what I am going to talk about. And this is the argument. He uses the technique of argument in the first sentence. This method of abortion, named prostaglandin, makes the contractions that a woman usually experiences at the end of pregnancy come sooner. Possibly I could say that the second sentence is expository. Well, we can still align it to argument, but I feel it is more expository than argument because of the evidence that we find there. The writer is simply telling us what it is. He's not trying to persuade us and swing us to the other side, but it's just simply saying this is the reality, this is what it is. But of course, as we say that there is no clear dichotomy drawn between the genres. Some are clearly demarcated, others are very difficult to draw a line and then say this one here ends here, this one ends there. Some of them overlap, but we can ideally say that the first sentence is an argument. The second sentence, we can also say it is an argument, although it could also fall in the category of exposition. Then it is now in this statement, last sentence, that we find the description. The baby is usually stillborn. The phrase stillborn is descriptive because you can even see the limp body. And the little body, again, you can see the size of the body. We are told little. Stillborn and little gives us the impression of the vulnerability, the defenselessness of this child who has been murdered. And then again, the phrase that tells us thrown into a bucket. You can also visualize the body in a bucket, lying from the womb to the bucket, a cold bucket. And then the next description is the woman is wheeled off. You can see the woman is being driven away. So it is in this last sentence that the writer has exploited description. So the use of description in this last sentence helps us to see how insensitive the participants in this drama were and how defenseless a child in the womb is to an insensitive mother and an insensitive doctor. So at the end of it all, the writer is telling us, stop abortion. And there is no other way, better way, this argument, this persuasion could have come out without the employment of descriptive technique. You can see it yourself. Let's now look at this last part, definition of a concept. When you're defining a concept, we say that it's also one way through which you can use description. And as I mentioned previously, that in some cases, some instances, you may find an assignment or an examination asking you to write about a concept. And to write about a concept, you will be required to define that concept. For instance, you've been told to write about abortion. Discuss abortion. They don't tell you the disadvantages and advantages, but they say discuss abortion. So in order to begin this essay, you need to approach it from the definition perspective. Now, many times students want to run to a dictionary or other sources where definition of that concept is, and then copy and then paste it in the essay. This is a great risk because, as I mentioned before, that not every definition suits a context or a particular context in which you are writing. Remember that every writing that we are involved in, there's a context. There is a background to it. And this background can never be shifted to another background, as we shall see with Joe Parker here. So it is best to define, if you're going to use definition approach to introduce your essay, it is better to approach it from a descriptive point of view. Now, I usually believe that there's a great risk of using a cliche when you are going to borrow a definition from books that already exist, other than using your own creativity and place that definition in the context. Nobody is going to mark you wrong and then say that you have used this definition, but this definition is not in the dictionary. This definition does not exist. You are defining it based on the context, based on the situation in which you are, from the point of view that you are looking at the concept. So let us look at the illustration from Godwin Parker's article entitled what is poverty. We know what poverty is, and we can be able to define, or we can run to a dictionary and get that definition from there. But Joe Parker defines poverty from his own personal experience, from his own perspective, from his own context. And he says, poverty is getting up every morning from a dirt and illness-stained mattress. The sheets have long since been used for diapers. Poverty is living in a smell that never leaves. This is a smell of urine or sour milk and spoiling food, sometimes joined with the strong smell of long-cooked onions. Can you imagine the power of this definition? Because Joe Godwin Parker has used descriptive approach. He now allows us to smell poverty. He allows us to see poverty. At least he has tried to enable us appreciate poverty through the senses. This is what it means to incorporate, to integrate, to use the technique of description in your academic writing. And especially if you're dealing with concept definition, please try as much as possible to borrow a leaf from Parker. Then the final example of concept definition. I've used here, borrowed a definition of yeast. We all know what yeast is, and probably we could have even used a single sentence of a couple of words to define it. But in this particular case, again, the writer uses descriptive definition. And sometimes it is descriptive definition is sometimes called encyclopedic definition. This type of definition goes beyond the bare bone definition. It gives you an extended context and characteristics, as we have seen in the previous one, as well as in this. Yeast is a key ingredient for most baked goods that is commonly used as a leavening agent in baking bread and bakery products, where it converts the fermentable sugars present in the dough's gluten into carbon dioxide and ethanol, thus trapping the releasing bubbles of gas into the gluten and making the dough fill up like a balloon as it rises. Very powerful. Again, just like we saw with Joe Parker, in this particular context, the writer also appeals to our senses in the definition of yeast. We can see the rise of yeast in the product. We can smell the carbon dioxide. So through smell, through sight, we can appreciate the definition of yeast. So I said here that the advantage with descriptive definition is that it helps students avoid the use of cliché definitions, which I've already talked about, you'll find in books. In this way, the writer will go beyond the mere bare definition by providing the context and the characteristics, the qualities of the concept. I said here that if this approach is well constructed, it will leave your readers engaged right from the beginning of your essay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of this lecture. Thank you.